Very good. Looks like we've got a good smattering of folks. Um, we have an exciting debrief today. As people know, we've been rolling over the network to the next epoch that has unveiled some interesting aspects of the code. So what we'll do is we'll give Rao will give the sort of normal debrief, and then I'll pick it up and talk about the last 24 hours or so. And then we will move on from there to business aspects of staking that are public or can go in the public channel. And then we'll move from there to the community and review and round it out with any additional questions from the community. So hopefully that works as a shape for the meeting. So without further ado, let's turn the mic over to Rao.
Okay, I think everybody should be seeing my screen. That says Community Update 132, dated today. Basically, as of last week, we were running 09.25.1 on the mainnet. We updated all the nodes to 09.25.1. At the moment, the mainnet is closed. Like Greg said, we've been trying to get ready for the epoch change at the 250K block size. And that means we need to get the new validators bonded and the request for unbonding the validators at the 250K block. They all need to be in before we reach that epoch change limit or block size. And to that extent, we started working on that. As of right now, the mainnet is at, I think, 52 blocks short of the epoch. So we started to work on this bonding and unbonding requests. And then I'll talk to that in a little bit more detail after I do an overview of where we are with the definite releases, and then Greg will cover that in a lot more depth. So basically, as we were doing these changes, I mean, if you recall from my previous, like last week's update, I did mention that 09.25.2 is a release in which we're working on some security bugs as well as testing and improving bonding and unbonding process. The intention was that we would have been able to release this as before yesterday. But as it happens, this testing and improving the bonding and unbonding process took more time and still revealed some issues yesterday as we were getting ready for the epoch. So what we now did is that we have the issues that were identified are resolved now in a PR, and then that we're releasing as 09.25.1.1. I know there's a lot of sub-release numbers, which I don't personally like, but we will sanitize that numbering scheme to the, there is a thing called semantic versioning, which is the industry standard for release names or release tags. So we will change to that over the next couple of months. But for now, we wanted to leave 09.25 to indicate this milestones when everything is complete, including the security bugs. The 09.25.1.1 is the intermediate release we're doing now. That's, you can see, that's kind of tagged already and is on the GitHub. So this is the one that will be running now on the mainnet and has been tested on the testnet and devnet. And this includes improvements to the bonding and unbonding process. So that's what those are, we'll speak to in a little bit. So that's where we are relative to the immediate releases. And then the bigger or the kind of longer term, or not longer term, but near term, larger scope really is this 0926 release, which will complete the last finalized state. But as you can see, we have 0925.2 to go through, and then the 0926. So that's kind of where we are with releases. Nothing has changed in terms of planning for release 26 or 27. So I'm not going to cover that in a whole lot of detail. Where we are with the mainnet now, the mainnet is going to have 20 validator nodes, most or all of them on the IBM cloud in multiple regions. And in terms of other things, last week in the tech governance, we discussed quite a few of the issues that were entered originally way back in 2018 by the development team at the time as potential things to resolve. Now, as it turns out, many of those are related to the kind of how many validators do you need per a certain number of blocks, or how much stake do you need per certain number of blocks, and things like that. Essentially, what's the relationship of network security to the number of validators and the amount of stake and things like that. And there has been also in the community, there has been quite a bit of conversation, and we've been working on that as part of the strategy group with some of the community members. So we discussed models of how we may be able to get a grip on that as to what are the floor and ceiling, if you would, within which we need to operate to ensure network security as it relates to validator economics and stake, percent of stake in relation to what's issued, all of that. So that was part of the discussion in the tech governance last week, and the notes are at that link that's provided. And we discussed the Excel model. I said last week that we're going to get some of the community members are preparing an Excel model. That initial version of that was discussed at the tech governance last week. Other things, there seems to be quite a bit of movement on the RChat. There is still help needed there. So if folks are willing to help, there is a separate repository for RChat in the RChain community repository. Feel free to pick any items you can work on over there. That's the effort that's based on Zulip. Now, I want to kind of start the conversation on really what was going on with this staking and preparing the mainnet for the epoch change, and then hand it over to Greg to go into more detail.
Actually, we should check and see if there are any questions about what you've covered so far.
Yeah, are there any questions on any of these releases and whatever I said so far?
Coolio?
I have a question, Arthur.
Yes.
The discussion with you, Greg, on all the ZK knowledge stuff, I'm not sure if I'm seeing that. Can I get involved in that somehow?
Sure, absolutely. You can help me if you want. I'm working on a summary of RChain's position on this stuff. So yeah,
okay, great.
I'm happy. We can set up some time to chat.
Okay, great, thanks.
So Arthur, I didn't hear you completely. Were you talking about the privacy and zero knowledge proof stuff, or did you?
Greg creating a position statement on the zero knowledge. If you just go
Yes.
up a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. All right. Any other questions? Okay. So this 0925.11, which is the release for improving bonding and unbonding process, what we discovered as the mainnet was chugging along, and then we shut it off for external deploys, and then started doing the bonding and unbonding deploys on that. And as we started doing that, we saw that the mainnet was getting a very high CPU and memory utilization. So slowing things down, which surprised us. So we started looking into that. And the fix that is in there now for that situation is improving the DAG store so that it doesn't, whenever as you do bonding unbonding, it doesn't have to go all the way back to the Genesis to check for information. So that's the fix that the team is working on right now.
Actually, if I might jump in,
Go ahead.
There's two layers to that. So the source of the problem, which we were able to verify, is the fact that when a bonding request for new validator comes in, the freshly bonded validator needs to be given sort of a Genesis-like block, right? With a block upon which they can start proposing blocks until they have received blocks from other validators. If you don't do that, then if you were to unbond everybody and attempt to rebond, then they'd all be stuck waiting for everyone else to send them a block. And this is the same thing that happens with Genesis at the Genesis moment, right? At the Genesis moment, nobody has any blocks, but they can proffer the Genesis block as their own. So this is it's the same idea. They have to have sort of a rock to stand on. So a Genesis-like thing, and you can debate as to which thing that is, but the existing code used the Genesis block, which meant that as soon as there was the fork choice tip triggered a calculation from the estimator, then it would traverse all the way back to Genesis to do the calculation. And that was causing all of the nodes to be slammed in terms of CPU usage. So that's not a good thing. So the first step is to fix the existing DAG store so that the bonding request that's already there in the store doesn't point back to Genesis, but points back to a much more recent block. Then the next change, and then restart the network, make sure that they're not slammed in terms of computation, which I believe has already happened. Is that correct, Rao?
Well, they tested on the DevNet and testnet, but they're beginning to do that on the mainnet.
Okay, great. So then the next step after fixing the DAG store is to fix the line of code. So and then there's some wiggle room in terms of which blocks you can choose. There are two natural blocks to choose. One is more recent in history, in fact, as recent as you can possibly get for that newly bonded validator, and the other is a little further back in time. So the one is the block that contained the bonding request for the newly bonded validator is a natural place for that validator to begin with. Now there's a little bit of you have to convince yourself that that's okay. And the reason is that you could imagine that that block got orphaned. Well, if that block was orphaned, then the validator would never actually be bonded. And if it's not bonded, then no blocks that are using it as a validator will ultimately be accepted by the majority of the stake. So if the validator is actually bonded, then the block that had their bonding request must have been finalized, and so that's a reasonable beginning point. To kind of avoid all of that fancy reasoning, you can go further back in time and give the newly bonded validator the last finalized block, as was the case at the time of the bonding, when the bonding request was packaged in a block. That's a lot to take in. Any questions about what I just said? It's all crystal clear then. It wasn't clear to us. We had to argue for quite some time before we convinced ourselves what the different choices were. But that's essentially the minimal change that we'll make so that we don't get this sudden spike in CPU usage and the network remains usable. So those changes are being rolled out. Over time, we want to get a little bit more subtle about some of the things associated with the newly bonded validators. But this really won't hit us until the next epoch change and or when we have 100 nodes that are validating. So those are two conditions whereby at which we absolutely have to have a couple of subtle points nailed down. And so we have a little bit of time to get those changes in, so we don't have to roll those out at this time when we're rolling the network over and keep the network down longer than is strictly necessary. Does that make sense to folks? Any questions about that?
Well, my question goes back to a change in the DAG or something. Is this changing history? Is this like a fork that we're making?
It's sort of like a fork, except that nobody has seen those blocks, right? Those blocks, the block we're talking about changing was the last block issued, and it's the one that contains the bonding request for one of the new validators. There's only one new validator bonding request went in, and that's when we saw the problem. And so that validator, its last message, which is essentially its Genesis, points all the way back to Genesis. So we're going to change the DAG so that it, instead of pointing to Genesis, it points to the block that was associated with its bonding request. Does that make sense?
Okay, so this is like you're changing the most recent block.
We're changing the most recent block. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And that's because, and it's the only one with a bonding request in it. So we're not going back in time and rewriting history. It's not quite like that. But I understand the concern. But this turns out to be like the fastest way to get the network up with the least amount of risk. So that's why we're taking that path.
Thank you.
Sure. No, thank you for the question. It's very important. Any other questions on this matter or related matters?
Well, I guess one question would be, when is the ETA for when mainnet's back up?
I can't give you a good estimate right now. It's imminent, but I don't want to I don't want to say anything and then have some surprise come along. But it's imminent. I wouldn't be surprised if it's up today or tomorrow. Should be today.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, but do note that Tomislav, for example, worked a good 30 hours straight without stop. And their time zones are shifted with respect to ours. So it might be the case that some members of the team actually have to get some sleep before we complete all the pieces of work.
That's no excuse.
Any other questions, folks? Okay, Rao, did you have any more you wanted to add?
No, nothing, nothing on this at this time. But they're working to get the mainnet up. They're restarting the nodes and testing a few at a time, just to make sure that both the testing is fast and also complete and thorough. So that's kind of where we are at this point in time.
Yeah.
So they'll be testing that a few times before they go implement the change.
We are in a position where, so there's, I think roughly 72 million staked for Epoch 2. So a lot of people have decided to stake. I think there was on the order of about 3 or 4 million withdrawn from the previous stake. So I think sum total, there's about 68 million fresh stake coming in from the community. We will be, as soon as the mainnet is back up, we will be sending out, as a courtesy to the members who sort of joined in early and took on a lot of risk, we will be, rather than waiting the quarantine period, we will be sending out the stake. So we're just waiting for mainnet to get back up. For those people who are withdrawing, be aware that, you know, if you didn't pay your fees up front, you're not going to get your full seniorage. You'll only get about 85% of your seniorage. Trying to think, any other points about the staking returns, Raul, that I'm not covering?
It just occurred to me that because I think we are like more than 4 months, right? It's about 12 days or so over the 4 months.
Yeah.
So I think we need to pay or do seniorage calculations with the extra days to even
Yeah.
though.
Or notice that we topped up the rewards, right? So that might balance it out. So that's another thing is because the rewards were so small, we ended up adding a little bit of slosh into that. Again, when this is completely controlled by POS and the co-op is not extending a courtesy, we won't be able to do this except by some out-of-band process. But because the co-op is providing this courtesy, we have the flexibility to add a little bit more in terms of the transaction fees, and which we took the benefit of doing. But that raises the specter. We do need to have a conversation about raising the price of flow for some period of time, just so that we can start to have validation be more convincing as a sustainable business. I mean, obviously the right side of this to work on is to get more and more and more people working on dApps and using dApps on the network. And I have some points to make about that shortly, but you know, we can proceed on multiple fronts. So while we're working on that, we should, as we've said since the formation of the co-op, it's probably a good idea to raise the transaction fees. We don't want to do this right away because that will impact the wallets that might have built-in flow price assumptions, and it will affect exchanges that also might have, you know, hard-coded flow price assumptions. So so we want to roll that out carefully, but it's a change that's most likely to come. We definitely want feedback from the community, right? This affects everybody. And so the community, needs to weigh in and say whether or not, or what their opinions are about raising the transaction fees while we're trying to build up the volume of transactions. Any questions?
I just wanted to add the conversation really is about how do we ensure decentralization and network security is really the goal. So the validator economics and everything else is part of that, to be able to say, if you don't have proper validator economics at any given point in time, you won't get either decentralization or stake on the network, and hence that impacts security. So that's really the main driver.
Indeed. So please, don't be silent on this point. Think about it, weigh in, give us your thoughts. Right, we need to tap into the collective intelligence here, and make sure that this is a move that has the support of the community. All right. With that, unless there are any other questions, I'll turn it over to Daryl to do the community in review. Daryl?
Hey, everybody. Here is the Community Week in Review for this past week. Last Thursday in the Governance Committee meeting, the committee completed discussions on validator rewards, liquid democracy, and multi-stakeholder issues. The Strategy Improvement Working Group provided updates on their discussions with regards to sustainable economics for network security and decentralization. Also on Thursday, the DApp Developer Working Group developed and tested Rolang log class to trace execution in production in lieu of access to std out and std air. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. On Friday, on the Climate and Coordination call, Steve Ross Talbot presented an idea around eco-villages and how they could utilize RChain to globally and locally coordinate. Then I asked Greg some layperson questions about operational semantics and logical form, aka OSLF, and how it applies to RChain. On Saturday was the RChat call, where they developed sequence diagrams for voting with RChain and Zulip Chat. On Monday, in the Casper stand-up call, Greg covered a small piece of operational semantics and logical form, namely the correspondence between bisimulation and logical equivalence for plain old Lavier theories. And they talked about how to turn Lavier theories into bidirectional rewrite systems. Also on Monday, on the blockchain art call, they looked at gaming card art dApps and the hexagon RChain dappy dApp use of non-fungible ERC 1155 style tokens. Yesterday in the communications working group, we discussed updating the coin market cap info. We working on our Instagram presence, and Steve Henley suggested we use a Google Doc planner spreadsheet, and we discussed searching out open source project management collaboration software that we could start using, and eventually even put on RChain, similar to what we're doing with Zulip to RChat. Also on Tuesday, the DApp Developer Working Group completed work on new Locker contract employing deployer ID. And this morning on the members hangout in Jim's room, Steve Henley presented some research he's doing in regards to open source hardware. The group also discussed various open source project management tools that could be used by RChain. And Gary showed the hexagon game that they're developing to run on RChain using Dappy. And that brings us to now.
Awesome. Any questions for Daryl? Very good. Any questions, topics, thoughts that people want to address while we're all gathered here together?
While we were still on the subject of proof of stake and kind of increasing the amount of nodes to 100, I kind of reminds me when I was suggesting to change the proof of stake contract to kind of act more as delegated proof of stake, where people can actually appoint validators to kind of and back it up with their own stake. So essentially, like as like staking, but telling like this is the validator is gonna do all the signing and putting blocks on the chain. So I was thinking, since it has issues, like we saw with Steemit, maybe we could kind of make a mix between the two and kind of where, for example, validator has to stake his own portion, and people can, for example, create a staking pool and join the same staking pool as a validator. For example, if I was to stake like 1 million ref, right, I can also take in 1 million ref of other people, but I will not be actually holding those ref, rather, but instead a smart contract will basically hold the ref and distribute the rewards.
Well, you know, what I would suggest is to write up the details and give us a sketch of an argument as to why it's correct. So with respect to Casper, we know why it's safe. We have a proof of its safety. I have a sketch of a proof of how to ensure that it's live.
Yeah, but creating staking pools, that's kind of where the security issue comes in, because people have to actually trust the validator, because validator has to hold all the ref up front before bonding.
No, that's not the case at all. You can write a smart contract on top of the chain that does all of that for you. That's completely outside of the co-op, right? That has nothing to do with the co-op proper. To do what you're, if you just want to build up sophisticated staking pools, I strongly encourage you to write up a smart contract that manages the staking pool rev in the way that makes people feel confident and works with respect to the epic changes. So, you know, I mean, that would be a fantastic effort, I think. You know, the more contracts we have like that, especially if we have some contracts that kind of lead the way, so that people can start with that and go, oh, well, what if you change it this way, or what if you change it that way? And then that would be like an excellent development of the technology.
Okay, that's great, because I saw like, what if a smart contract that has its own purse could join the bond, kind of do the bonding request and do all the staking.
Yeah, that's
but
exactly.
but someone has to hold the private key and sign the transactions. So I don't know how it's gonna work.
Yeah, so if you have multi-sig, you can do that, right? But then there are issues associated with multi-sig, right? Because, you know, if you can't get the community to agree on, you know, various time critical actions in time, then that's a vulnerability. So I think it's a great problem to go tackle. Any other questions or comments?
I had just a general question about funding, but has there been any effort to try to get Rev listed on Coinbase?
Not yet. As I mentioned before, I am not pursuing any additional exchanges until after last finalized state is done and dusted. As soon as that's in, you know, actually running live, then I will pull out the stops and approach several other exchanges, especially Coinbase.
Oh, okay, sounds good.
Yep. No, it's a really good suggestion, and now is the time to do it for sure. Just you know, waiting on the code to be there. Any other questions?
I just want to thank Tomislav, Ian, Rao, yourself, Nutzipper, and anybody else who's been like putting in all those hours over the last 48 hours or so.
Will, Gurinder.
Will, exactly, yeah.
Lilia.
Nutzipper, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The team is so inspiring. It is such a joy and a pleasure to work with these folks. They're tireless. They're dedicated. They're focused. You know, it's like you know, it's definitely makes me raise my game. So I'm really pleased to be working with everyone on the team. All right, unless there is anything else to cover, thank you so much for your time and attention. And there will be some important updates in the Friday closed door session, which are, yeah, things I can't talk about here, but we'll talk about there.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.